small business and niche, they can actually go to their customer and say, look, we're launching a new style. We're telling a story. We're letting people know about it. And we're going to offer pre-sale. And there's 2 levels of pre-sale. There's that buy now, get 9 months later. And there is a buy now, get 4 weeks later. And then what that's doing is front loading the demand of a particular sale, allowing by 3 or 4 weeks before the goods are in. They're probably manufactured and en route, but they can gauge early the demand on those sales. They can book those numbers into their revenue stream, and they can immediately proactively plan additional deliveries to be delivering to fill in for the voids that they know they're going to have well before they receive their first shipment.
Welcome to Clothing Culture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward and discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Culture is produced by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience. Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Culture. Today, it's just the two of us, Bret. And oh my, do I have a juicy topic for us. Are you ready?
That sounds cynical.
Well, we are going to be talking about math.
That's the same thing my 3rd grade teacher did, and it was met with complete silence in the classroom.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't stop this episode just yet. I promise it's going to be worth it. I know that our industry...
And if it isn't, you'll get a few Z's, right? You can take a little nap,
right.
Take a break during the day.
Lullaby.
Right.
No, in all seriousness, it's a really important part of our business. We understand, the sexy part of our business is one of trends and fabrics and what comes down that runway. But what really makes a business successful is that bottom line, the numbers. And there are a lot of kind of standard formulas and rules to kind of follow when building a successful business in this space.
There is. There's, and that's kind of an evolving space, but there's always what we call kind of retail 101 numbers that companies that are newer or startups, things like that, should really make sure that they understand. I remember years ago when I started, past working in retail and moving up to the main office, my first job and responsibility was kind of managing distribution and numbers. And for a creative, it was like rope burn, right? It was tough. And I remember at the time I was like, okay, you say pay your dues. This is paying dues, because holy smoke, there was a lot more manual. There were almost 300 or 400 stores, and understanding these metrics and making sure that the units were in these areas at the right time, and analyzing the success of a particular style or color or size, et cetera, which we always had Monday meetings to do. And we were required to kind of pull that information. I was just like, I'm not in Kansas anymore. This is tough. This is not what I had planned. So.
Yeah. And, we actually have kind of this conversation quite a bit. So we thought, well, let's just capture this one. And hopefully it'll be some good information for a lot of those that are really trying to consider how to turn their apparel company into a really profitable venture. So I kind of want to start with some fundamentals and go up from there. Let's just start at, what are some of those basic rules of thumb when it comes to retail, wholesale costs?
Sure. So, all brands kind of start in the visionary, finding the niche, creating a dream, driving that business. And then at some point, it comes honestly down to an important understanding and grasp of how those numbers relate to decisions that you make in your business on a daily basis. And I remember the first thing I was ever told as a buyer was that you will never buy the right amount.
Right.
And I remember that initial conversation.
Underbuy or overbuy.
You either underbuy or you overbuy. And I remember that initial conversation, how off-putting that was, because you thought that there was enough science to be able to always determine that. And over the years, I've realized that it's really challenging to get that needle close. That with more information and and particular products, you can hone in and be a lot more effective on those decisions. But the one thing that people should always understand, that whenever they're going out to do a product launch, or they're in the first number of years in their business, is that you're never going to overbuy or underbuy. And some of the cues behind that are, if you know that, you're either going to overbuy or underbuy. The next set of cues is that most businesses typically will do between 40 and 60% of their business in basics. Mm-hmm. And what I refer to in basics is things that are usually trans-seasonal, don't have a cadence for an immediate markdown, aren't too trendy. They kind of stay in and year out. And I resemble that remark with my black T-shirts, right? Every day. And so those kind of core basics done correctly can make a huge difference in your business. And
build real loyalty and repeat business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then those particular items, if you're going to overbuy, those are the ones to overbuy.
Yeah, because you just have longer weeks of supply, right?
If your trend is a little slow at a particular year, it takes you a little more time to build and ramp up that volume. Those units aren't at huge risk to mark down. Mm-hmm. And the last thing you want to do, a lot of people, I remember even last year and a few years before that, visiting some of these new startups, and the first thing that they would say is, "Oh my God, we're blowing out of items. We're just selling through them, and look how successful we are." And I'd analyze their online site, and I'd kind of go in and click on styles, and extra large or whatever my size was, and it was kind of like sold out. And then I go to the next one, sold out, next one, sold out. And it was just like...
Yeah, how many times do you get before a consumer leaves?
Before the customer bounces and doesn't come back. And so in some places, selling out too rapidly or not having some consistent product all the time, you're leaving a ton of money on the table. You're in many cases, you're upsetting the client. With properly done core basics that are always in stock, customers are there loyal time in, time out. They buy one color, they love that. They want to buy multiple more colors to fit in their wardrobe, or after time, washes, wear, one of those garments may not be as fresh as you would think, or they wear out and you're going to buy another one. So making sure that you're in stock in those products, hence, if you will, the term slightly overbuy till you can analyze your business and understand how quickly it takes to get back into those goods is a key point. And then as you move up the ladder to what we call fashion basics or fashion pieces, fashion basics can resemble core, moderately a little bit, but they're generally seasonal, something that might be related to a particular summer, winter campaign, fabrication, or some type of a look. And then fashion are these items that, you see from a distance and compels you to go take a look at the item, and then you realize, man, maybe at 62 I can't wear a leopard shirt and I'm going to go buy a black T-shirt, right?
Yeah.
You're going to go buy the core. Those items, if you're going to overbuy or underbuy, those typically you want to have in a situation where you underbuy to the expected demand a little bit, because then the result is, saying demand twice, you increase demand. People are like, my God, I missed the boat. I should buy more of those, or I should be on the bandwagon quicker next time. And so having an understanding of those basic matrices at the outset for your entire assortment is really important.
Yeah, I completely understand. So you're really looking at kind of like a 60% of your business being core.
It's usually 40 to 60%, depending on a normal business.
So I want to take a step back a little bit and just talk about, a lot of times when we're building an initial line or a collection, we really set to work through assortment plans, which we'll talk about. But, we start with kind of this, like, what is the price that we think the consumer is going to be willing to pay for the garment? And then you kind of back down from there. Let's talk a little bit about those fundamental formulas for a retail price versus what you would consider a wholesale price, versus then how like what's the ratio for cost up to retail? Yeah,
sure. Some of those numbers are a little fungible, brand by brand. But overall in the industry, especially with a lot of transparency that's going on today, and transparency in pricing and other things like that, people like Quince, et cetera, are being a lot more visible. Doing such a cool job with that. Yeah. But the number really hasn't changed much in a number of years. And the MSRP, manufacturer suggested retail price, is usually at a 75% markup from your cost. So when the customer buys it at $5, then your retail is going to be somewhere in the $20, $25 range ish, because of the fungible nature. And people are like, wow, that's a pretty healthy markup. But when you realize all the things that go into running a successful business, there's such a thing called overhead that people don't really think about. And, you're paying people, you've got marketing and shipments and
podcast to record.
And not every garment sells through. And there's just a lot of things that go into that. So a lot of that number gets used up, and, net profits are never in that position. Technology gets the luxury of, very, very high profits and very high maintained profits. But the retail industry doesn't really live that same degree. So setting that position, I always tell brands that we work with that the ideal goal is to set your MSRPs at about 75% of cost so that you manage overhead, that if you have some, we always talk about this on other podcasts too, about good, bad, and ugly wall, things that you think are going to do well that don't. You always have a certain amount of markdowns. That you're covering all those things and you remain a healthy, viable business for your employees and customers that buy into your brand and they really like it, you're going to be around for a while.
Right.
When it comes to wholesale pricing, it's sort of a sub-factor or subset of that where it's broken down into two components. And again, those numbers are a little fungible. But typically a wholesale relationship with a retailer on a brand, they'll get about 50% or what we call a keystone markup, which means if you wholesale it at 10, the retailer will put it out at $20. They get kind of an entire one-time markup, double the cost. And then from that point of wholesale, the brand itself, depending on the viability of the brand, the amount of expense they have in marketing and advertising, et cetera, they'll run between 30 and 50% as an internal markup. The combined between the two markups, the 50-50, kind of equal about a 75% direct to consumer. And today we live in a world of multi-channel.
Right.
So there's always these blended margins if you're selling wholesale on one side and you're selling direct to consumer on the other. Pros and cons to all of that, but the brand can maintain a slightly higher markup than they used to when you traditionally just always had sales to brick and mortar.
Right. A lot of times we get the question of how much is this going to cost? I want to go to market, how much it's going to cost. And one of the things that we walk a lot of our clients through is the assortment plan. Let's talk about the value of that with regards to budgeting and the planning phase.
Yeah, there's two components of marketing. The overall reaching plan that a lot of retailers use is called an open-to-buy plan. That's usually based upon history, based upon budgets, based upon the growth or lack of growth in a particular category. And that will be usually mandated by the numbers people in the organization. And, if you have a $10 million category and last year you outsold your inventory and you were up in sales, maybe this year allocated $15 million in your category. That open to buy is a total revenue number broken back into units at average retail. And then that lays in how you can fill in that open to buy based upon garments in your particular, let's say you're a knit buyer.
In your category.
Within your category, about how you fill those things, what the average sell-off and turn is of those particular items within a season, how much is going to go on promotion and markdown. And all those things come into a position that says, you need to buy at this retail X amount of units, start that at the season, flow in every month certain units to hit that overall number. So that's the open to buy.
Okay.
Within that open to buy, with detailed analysis, with some forecasting, with some testing on new trend and things that go into that, you can develop what's called an assortment plan. And an assortment plan can take a lot of different shapes and forms, and people can use different versions of assortment plan. But for the purposes in our organization, we sit with clients to define what their buy is going to look like for a particular season by breaking that out in core, fashion, basic, and fashion by category, knits, wovens, outerwear, bottoms, accessories, etc. And then what those units look like in terms of a buy. On the far right side, what that MSRP is, what that MSRP extended is, so they can look at their total revenue. And then we break that and return it back on two levels, a wholesale back to cost or a direct back to cost on a direct-to-consumer model. And then that provides a template for establishing units at a price of a particular style. And then that helps then you reverse engineer products to hit those price points. And you dialogue about if it doesn't hit a particular price point, do we raise MSRP? Do we take a lesser margin because we're testing new product? It begins the dialogue of creating that assortment for your particular category for a month or a quarter or a season or a year, and what you're going to buy to, like we mentioned earlier, 40 to 60% in core. So if you have an assortment plan based upon this open to buy, and you're going out buying tons of leopard print shirts, you realize that you still have to cover 40% of that buy in solid color polos or crew necks or something, so you don't overbuy these fashion items to your core base that's driving that business.
It really empowers you on your budget too, because you can really look at that assortment plan and go, okay, you know what your minimums are to get into a particular style. You have that number in, you know what your goal retail price is, then you can kind of use that formula that we talked about, your cost to wholesale to retail, and then boom, you multiply that all out, and now you know what the target cost is. When you calculate that out across your entire collection, you know what your budget is.
And you sort of have a guiding light on what type of items and what categories you're going to buy. You can do a much more detailed assortment plan from that overreaching assortment plan that kind of breaks it into generality. Whenever we looked at business, the one big unknown factor is no one has a crystal ball. And so you could always look back at history, but business evolves, and it's always evolving, right? The number one constant is change. And so with business evolving, the thing that we would look at as buyers is what's trending recently. And we would break down, let's say it was an Oliver polka dotted shirt, right? And we'd put that in as a test, and that was 3% of our buy, and it was trending at 10% of the business. Well, when you looked at 10% of the sales on 3% of the buy, it's pretty easy to indicate that the customer is leading that buy, the demand exceeds supply. And that can be treated on a particular item like that, or on a category of product like cashmere sweaters or whatever the case may be. And when you analyze that and you're seeing that demand exceeds supply, one of the adjustments that occur both in open to buy and assortment planning is that you're saying, look, I'm not looking completely back at history. I'm looking at current trend, or as current as I can for a particular season, and realize that I missed the boat, or I'm missing the opportunity because the customer's buying at a rate more than I am buying the actual inventory on. So I need to be a little bit more aggressive on this particular category in my next buy.
Right. So we're really talking about once you got the product in house, now we're taking a look at those sales, and a key factor is taking a look at weeks of supply to inform future decisions.
It's percentage of sales to percent of inventory. Weeks of supply will help you determine how quickly you're going to run out of inventory.
Okay.
So the formula kind of works like this. As a buyer, we would be penalized, if you will, if we ran out of things too quickly. And so when you're analyzing business on a weekly basis, we usually have planning meetings and sales review meetings. We'd always have it on Monday. So for those of you that haven't been in retail a long time, or salespeople trying to approach retail, never call on a Monday, because everyone's doing postmortems of the sales of the previous week. Usually, at least that's my understanding of it. But when you looked at those things, the other thing you would look at is this sell-off percent. And so if you were selling at a rate of 10% sell-off per week, that meant typically you were selling 10% of your inventory by week. If it remains steady at a rate, and it usually doesn't, if you've got a lot of demand, that sell-off kind of increases and your inventory goes down. But you would, all things remaining equal, a 10% sell-off loosely would mean you had 10 weeks of supply when you looked at it on that day.
Okay.
Right? If it took you 14 weeks to get back in inventory, you knew you were going to be out of business for 4 weeks. So you better pull the trigger on a fill-in or a buy, and then figure out how to execute that 14-week supply in 10.
Okay.
If you were selling at a 8% sell-off or a 6% sell-off, you would obviously subsequently have longer weeks of supply. And if that fit into the timeline of when you could get back into goods, and weeks of supply are really important on core basics, and they should be analyzed not only by the overall style, but by the color and by the size.
You read my mind. I'm like, let's talk about the factors that should be in consideration as you're watching your daily, weekly sales.
Yeah, a lot of people would look at weeks of supply as the overall style, and they would never drill down. Sometimes they would drill down to color. Many times they would drill down to color, especially on basics. But many times they would forget to be looking at the sell-off by size. And these are additional complications as we live in a more inclusive world because we're running more sizes. We're running bigger sizes. We're running talls. We're running petites. And and you should never buy your buy across the board evenly by size because sales don't occur that way. And so you want to make sure that one, you're trying to create this kind of bell curve where the majority of population kind of sits in terms of a particular size. And there's a lot of science out there to support that. But then after you do that initial buy, hopefully you've overbought a little bit so you don't sell out too quickly.
Because once you're broken,
size.
now
that size is what it is, right? You buy 3% of that size and you sell out, you're only going to sell 3%, right? But at one point in the initial distribution of that, and you see those initial sales when nothing is broken, you should be taking snapshots of what the percentage of sales are to the percentage of inventory by size. And then as you go back in to buy that item in terms of replenishment or fulfillment, you apply the new formula, if it makes sense, to that new buy, and you're constantly massaging that purchase by size. And then especially, this is done really well in the bottoms business because bottoms overall don't have a lot of evolution. Today, they might have a little more, but we all wear the same jean over and over again. We wear, the same khaki pant or whatever. And that's a really commodity type purchase. And they have a lot of sizes, frankly, more than sports sizing. You have lengths and waist sizes and all of that. And so always analyzing sales when you have the inventory and massaging the inventory on an ongoing basis to make sure inevitably over a period of time, you can be really pretty accurate on managing your inventory to size.
What is Tam and Sam? Or who are Tam and Sam, I should say? I don't know. Tell me.
Two guys live down the street. They provide us our Chinese food. No. Tam and Sam. TAM is a reference when we're looking at demographics in your customer market in terms of total available market.
Oh, okay.
And SAM is the served available market. And this is a term that's used quite a bit in business in different areas. It's important that you understand who your customer is, and there's a more finite niche of a customer within an overall market. So outdoor athletes, you could say, is a total available market of outdoor athletes. There's a bunch of people out there doing stuff in the outdoors.
Right.
But a SAM could be the outdoor athlete that's climbing mountains, or the SAM is an outdoor athlete that's playing tennis. Yeah. Those are the served available market, the more specific kind of group of people that you might be tailoring your business to. You might get fringe business in terms of the overall scope, because a lot of apparel kind of blends borders, et cetera, pardon me. But the served available market is something that you should be really looking at. And as you're making decisions on product, you should be concentrating on how big that market is, what their buying habits are, and then analyzing that particular business. We were just on the call earlier about a very unique customer where it kind of flies in the face of typical retail. When you look in typical retail, a lot of retailers do a big percentage of their business around the holiday, right? People are buying gifts, business is up. This particular client that we've been working with for a while, their business occurs very heavily in the warmer months because it is an outdoor activity. And in looking at that business, they had approached us and said, help us. Because we were buying into thinking that business was going to explode in the winter, and it didn't really materialize. And as we really dialogued about that served available market, the market that's more finite and directed to them, we recognized that when we analyzed that business, that they would have large shifts of growth in the months of the warmer weather months. It would start sometime in April,
especially if that's what the
climb
product
up through
is
August or
designed
September.
for, right? Yeah.
And it would climb up through August or September. So the bell curve, when you're analyzing business every year, another retail math number is that you should always be breaking out your overall revenue by month. January is 3% of my business. February is 10% of my business. March is whatever. And it climbs. And then you tailor your deliveries to fall in line with when your big revenue months are, your big demand months are. And you tailor down your inventory when your revenue months are not.
So we're talking about, your typical, your months when things are going well. What about when markdowns come into play?
Sure. Well, we all live in markdown world. I've lived it many times. Sometimes those markdowns are, boy, I made a mistake. I thought it was going to be the next best thing, and it's the number one worst thing. And every buyer will go through that, and we talk about that. And as I mentioned a little earlier, good, bad, and ugly. As a buyer, I always had a good, bad, and ugly wall. Good was something that I thought was going to be great.
You really want to look at that good wall all the time because you want to be like, I did so well. But the truth is.
And I would put in the bad section something I thought was good that would underperform. And then ugly was, what was I thinking?
I know. You don't want to look at it anymore, but you have to.
You have to. You have to stare at that and hopefully not make that mistake again. We're human beings. We always repeat our mistakes probably. But that really helps. And so when you look at kind of those things in conjunction with, those other comments, always look at good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah. What about promotions and sales?
Sure. So promotions and markdowns, obviously, in my mind, they're kind of two different things, yet there's still an impact to revenue. The markdowns on that good, bad, and ugly thing, that I guess I should finish that answer, is that markdowns can be addressed for the ugly. And markdowns sometimes are that you bought something that was good, but you just bought too many. And it's seasonal and you have to clear them out because heavy wool sweaters in the summer aren't going to sell. So
there's only so much room. Right?
And with markdowns, the one thing an old saying is, your first markdown is your best markdown. Don't walk timidly in that night. Recognize for what it is and get rid of it. Liquidate it. It's not going to get better.
Okay.
Promotions are a little bit different. And, a lot of this goes to consumer behavior, although that Amazon's changing some of that consumer behavior. And we're seeing evidence with our retailers that are out there that it is changing. But we've been trained as consumers to always wait for the deal. And I always joke about women in the gift bag scenario with makeup. And it's like, hey, this makeup line has put it out. I get a free gift with purchase. I'm buying, right? You're trained and they know that you're trained. And so they have these periods of the year that they launch the gift with purchase, and they know without question that they're going to drag some people in because I'm almost through that makeup, but it's gift with purchase.
Oh, I am so guilty of
Everyone, come on, they've got that to a science. Promotions in whatever way, whether it's a gift with purchase, whether it's a buy one, get one free, whether it's a percentage off, all of those things are things that our society, to different degrees, react to. It's the deal.
Yeah.
I bought this on sale.
Makes you feel even better about your purchase.
It does. The interesting part behind the wall is that retailers have wisened up to that. So sometimes the MSRPs are inflated so that they can just give the sale.
Yeah.
And know that once we launch the sale, sales are going to come into their own. We're going to meet our margins based upon that. But to show the markdown, we've inflated our retail. And again, with every kind of conditioning that the human being has, especially in our aspect of sales and promotion, there's science behind it on what people are doing in terms of that. And so promotions are things that will drive more business at certain times of the year when you have higher inventory, or it's a planned opportunity where you buy more in mass and you're intentionally planning that as a promotion for a period of time, and that you can calculate that when you run that promotion versus non-promotion, sales will lift by 30%. So you're actually buying heavier into that item for a planned promotion. It's a way to drive more business.
Yeah, and you got to track those promotions too, because if you find some formulas that are, or some incentives that are working particularly well at a particular time of year, that's really good to note for your business.
Oh yeah, all of these metrics, when we discuss that with our clients, it's super important to keep history, and it's super important to track your sales in whatever way you can at these proper times, whether it's weekly with inventory and sell off. Numbers tell the story many times in terms of history, and they can also help you tell this story and help you decipher a little bit of crystal ball in terms of trend, if you apply the right metrics and numbers.
Let's talk about pre-sale and how that can affect your bottom line.
Yeah, that is an amazing trend. I wish that was around when I was in retail. Because again, the overbuy, underbuy, and having inventory. And pre-sale is this crazy anomaly we're seeing more and more of. And again, this week we had a discussion with a client about the success of pre-sale. And there are certain people that have kind of adopted that, let's say during COVID, and they've kept it because the model is working. And I won't name 3 furniture stores, Our House, Restoration Hardware, and Crate and Barrel, but
companies we happen to love very much.
But boy, have they pulled something amazing off with the U.S. consumer, or the consumer in general. You walk in and you're like, hey, I'm going to buy that $5,000 couch, and they're like, great, pay us. And you're like, okay, let's run the card, and they charge you for it, and they go, we'll deliver it to you in 9 months.
Yep.
And you're like, what? And they're like, no, it's going to take 9 months. We're going to build it and deliver it to you. And in many cases, these groups are accomplishing sales up front. The cash sits in their coffers, and that cash that you're paying is both cost and profit. And it's sitting in their coffers for 9 months. And so the realization that that's occurring in certain parts of this overall consumer industry, and then we're seeing it happen and be successful also in apparel.
Absolutely.
Especially for brands that are kind of startups or brands, and probably
niche.
Of every size, but effectively small business and niche, they can actually go to their customer and say, look, we're launching a new style, we're telling a story, we're letting people know about it, and we're going to offer pre-sale. And there's 2 levels of pre-sale. There's that buy now, get 9 months later, and there is a buy now, get 4 weeks later. And then what that's doing is front-loading the demand of a particular sale, allowing by 3 or 4 weeks before the goods are in. They're probably manufactured and en route, but they can gauge early the demand on those sales. They can book those numbers into their revenue stream, and they can immediately, proactively plan additional deliveries to be delivering to fill in for the voids that they know they're going to have well before they receive their first shipment.
And based on the math that we talked about earlier of your retail versus your cost, we know that once they get to kind of that 25% mark of inventory sold through, they're really ahead in profit at that point.
Well, you've paid for the cost of goods.
Right.
You still have overhead and all these related expenses, but you've paid for the goods at 25%. And so, it's an amazing trend that's occurring, and we highly recommend that done correctly, done kind of transparently, it's a positive. The other thing where it's a positive too, that there's a big dialogue going on, is in the world of sustainability and landfill. If we could get to a point as a consumer, although we're not going to wholesale, I don't believe, but if we get to a point where we partner with our brands and we put these reorders in, and we're buying specifically the units that are going, or they're buying specifically the units that are going to be purchased and worn by their customer, you're eliminating these markdowns, you're eliminating these
waste,
overbuys and waste that go into landfill. So it is a positive kind of trend that's going on. And I think, that, in addition to the ability to help fund growing businesses, is a good thing.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing this incredible art of numbers. I know that when you started the business originally, you were a creative, and as you've gone through your career and into the path of a CEO, you've learned, of course, that there is beauty in numbers as well.
And when we did it to begin with, it was like scratch numbers on a stone, and now we're using computers. But yeah, it's made it a lot easier.
Any final thoughts to share?
Yeah, just don't be intimidated by numbers. Understand those numbers. Understand how those are related to the buys that you're making. We all buy sometimes emotionally. We all get excited about certain things. My biggest challenge as a visionary is I always get excited about things, the new shiny objects, and I want to move faster than we should. And, having people ground you with numbers and having a good partner that can run those numbers and help you make those decisions is really valid. And I would urge everyone to have that balance in the decisions that they make.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all of that insight. I knew we could make the conversation about math really cool.
And for the rest of you, wake up. It's time.
All right. Well, thank you for being here today. And don't forget to subscribe to stay apprised of upcoming episodes of Clothing Culture.